It was a perfect sunny afternoon. The sky was clear, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves on the trees that surrounded the neighborhood playground. 6-year-old Jamal was filled with excitement as he raced ahead of his mother, heading straight for his favorite spot, the swings. His small frame vibrated with energy, and his bright smile could light up the whole park. Jamal adored this playground. It was where children from all over the neighborhood gathered to play, laugh, and enjoy themselves. For him, it was a place of pure joy, where the outside world didn't matter, and where he could be just a kid. The playground was bustling with activity. Children ran between the slide and the jungle gym, while others climbed monkey bars or spun on the merry-go-round. The sound of laughter filled the air, blending with the creak of swings and the rhythmic tapping of a ball bouncing on the pavement. Jamal's eyes sparkled as he watched a group of kids playing tag near the jungle gym. He loved tag. It was his favorite game. He walked closer, hesitating for just a moment before speaking. "Hey, can I play too?" he asked, his voice carrying the hope and excitement of a child eager to join in. The children paused, looking at him for a second. Then one of the boys smiled and nodded. "Sure, you can be it first," he said, tagging Jamal, and laughing as he darted away. Jamal laughed too, immediately chasing after the kids, his heart racing with happiness. Not far from the jungle gym, a white woman sat on a wooden bench. She had her arms crossed, and her gaze was fixed on the game. Her 2 children were among those playing tag, and her expression shifted from neutral to disapproving as she noticed Jamal. Her posture stiffened, and she frowned deeply, as though she had just seen something she didn't like. "Why is he playing with my kids?" she muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she watched Jamal run and laugh alongside the group. The woman's discomfort grew as the game continued. She stood abruptly, dusting off her skirt, and began walking toward the children with purpose. Her movements were quick and rigid, her displeasure clear. "Excuse me," she called out sharply, her voice cutting through the joyful laughter. The children stopped in their tracks, turning to face her with puzzled expressions. Jamal, who had been in the middle of chasing another boy, came to a halt as well, unsure of what was happening. The woman's gaze landed squarely on Jamal. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her tone cold and accusatory. "You shouldn't be playing with these kids." Jamal's smile faded, replaced by confusion. "I'm just playing tag," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Her expression hardened. "Go find someone else to play with," she said, her voice louder now. "My children don't need to be playing with someone like you." Jamal blinked, his face falling as the weight of her words sank in. Before he could finish, the woman stepped closer and gestured sharply toward the edge of the playground. "I said leave," she snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. Then, as if to emphasize her point, she reached out and pushed him lightly on the shoulder. The push wasn't hard, but Jamal was a small boy and the force knocked him off balance. He stumbled backward and fell onto the rough gravel, landing hard on his hands and knees. A sharp sting shot through his palms and knees, and tears welled up in his eyes. The other children stared in stunned silence. None of them moved, their young minds struggling to process what had just happened. Jamal looked up at the woman, his wide eyes brimming with hurt and confusion. "Get up and go," she barked before turning to her own children. "We're leaving," she added, motioning for them to follow her. Her children hesitated, their expressions a mix of confusion and reluctance. But under their mother's stern glare, they quietly fell in line and walked away with her, and leaving Jamal alone on the ground. Jamal sat there for a moment, his chest tight with emotion. The sting of his scraped knees and palms was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. He didn't understand why she had pushed him, or why she didn't want him to play with the other kids. His small shoulders trembled as tears streamed down his face. All around him, the playground seemed to go quiet. The joyful noise that had filled the air just minutes earlier now felt distant, muffled by the weight of his sadness. Sniffling, Jamal slowly stood up. He brushed the dirt off his clothes and wiped his tears with the back of his hand. His head hung low as he walked away from the jungle gym. His earlier excitement completely replaced by confusion and hurt. He knew exactly where he needed to go. Looking across the park, he saw his mother sitting on a bench with a book in her hands. She always told him that if he ever felt scared or upset, he should come to her. And that's exactly what he did. With trembling hands and tears still streaming down his face, Jamal ran toward his mother, hoping she could make everything better. Jamal's small legs carried him as fast as they could across the playground. His chest heaved with every sob as tears streamed down his face, mixing with the dirt on his cheeks from his fall. His scraped knees and palms stung, but the ache in his heart hurt far more. The sting of humiliation and confusion filled his young mind, and he only wanted to feel safe again. Through his tears, Jamal saw his mother, Aisha, sitting on a bench near the edge of the park. She was reading a book, her legs crossed, completely unaware of what had just happened. Her calm demeanor, her warm presence, these were the things Jamal needed most right now. "Mommy," he cried out, his voice trembling as he ran toward her. Hearing her son's voice, Aisha immediately looked up, concern flooding her face as she saw him running toward her, tears pouring down his cheeks. She quickly set her book aside and rose from the bench, rushing to meet him halfway. "Jamal, what happened?" she asked, kneeling down to his level. She gently held his arms and studied his tear-streaked face. "Why are you crying? Are you hurt?" Jamal sniffled, struggling to catch his breath between sobs. "That lady, she said I couldn't play with her kids," he stammered. She pushed me and I fell." He pointed toward the woman, who was now walking away toward the parking lot with her children. Aisha's face shifted from concern to anger as she processed his words. "She pushed you?" she asked, her tone steady but firm. Her hands gently cupped his face, her thumbs wiping away his tears. "Baby, are you okay? Did she hurt you badly?" "My knees hurt," Jamal said quietly, showing her his scraped knees and hands. But why didn't she want me to play with them? I wasn't doing anything wrong." Aisha's heart broke at the sound of his question. She pulled him into a tight hug, her jaw tightening as she tried to control the anger bubbling inside her. "You did nothing wrong," she said firmly. "Do you hear me? Nothing. She was wrong, not you." As Jamal clung to her, Aisha stroked his back, her mind racing. She wanted to protect her son from further pain, but she also knew she couldn't let this incident go unanswered. Her son deserved to know that he belonged, and the woman who had humiliated him needed to be held accountable. "We're not letting this go," Aisha said, standing up and holding Jamal's hand. Her tone was calm but resolute, a steady strength that Jamal could feel even through his lingering tears. "Where are we going?" Jamal asked, his voice small and hesitant. "We're going to talk to her," Aisha said firmly. "She needs to know that what she did was wrong." Jamal hesitated, tugging slightly at her hand. "But what if she's mean again?" "She won't be," Aisha reassured him, crouching down so they were eye to eye. "I'm here, and no one is going to treat you like that again. Ever. Okay?" Jamal nodded, taking comfort in her words. He squeezed her hand tightly as they began walking across the playground toward the woman. The woman was just a few steps from the parking lot when Aisha called out to her. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying across the park. "Excuse me, I need to speak with you." The woman turned, startled. Her expression shifted from annoyance to unease as she saw Aisha walking toward her with Jamal at her side. She straightened her posture, her lips pressing into a thin line as though preparing for a confrontation. "Yes?" the woman said, her tone defensive. She glanced around, as if hoping to avoid drawing attention from the other parents in the park. Aisha didn't hesitate. "Did you just push my son and tell him he couldn't play with your kids?" she asked directly. Her tone was calm, but the steel in her voice made it clear she expected an honest answer. The woman scoffed, crossing her arms. "I didn't push him," she said dismissively. "He tripped, and yes, I told him to leave. My kids don't need to be playing with—" She stopped herself mid-sentence, realizing too late that she was about to say something incriminating. "With what?" Aisha asked sharply, her eyebrows raising. "Go ahead, finish your sentence." The woman's eyes darted around, noticing that other parents nearby had started paying attention. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said quickly. "I was just protecting my kids." "Protecting them from what?" Aisha asked, her voice rising slightly. "From a 6-year-old boy playing tag? From a child who just wanted to have fun?" Jamal held onto his mother's hand tightly, watching her with wide eyes. He could feel the power in her words, the unshakable confidence that made him believe everything would be okay. Aisha took a deep breath, keeping her composure. "You had no right to treat my son like that," she said firmly. "You humiliated him, you scared him, and you made him feel like he didn't belong. Do you think that's okay?" The woman shifted uncomfortably, her confidence waning under Aisha's steady gaze. I didn't mean to upset anyone," she muttered. "I just thought—" "You thought wrong," Aisha interrupted. "This playground is for everyone. My son has just as much right to play here as your children do." More parents had gathered now, their murmurs creating a low hum around the confrontation. A few nodded in agreement with Aisha's words, while others simply watched in silence. "You owe my son an apology," Aisha continued, her tone leaving no room for argument. The woman hesitated, her face reddening as the weight of the moment bore down on her. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Aisha nodded, but her expression didn't soften. She turned to Jamal, kneeling beside him. "See, baby," she said gently, "no one has the right to make you feel small. You belong here, just like everyone else." Jamal nodded, his tears drying, as he gave his mother a small, grateful smile. In that moment, he felt stronger knowing his mother would always stand up for him. As the woman's muttered apology hung in the air, Jamal felt a shift inside himself. His tears had dried and the ache in his chest began to ease. Holding his mother's hand, he looked up at her, his small frame standing a little taller. He saw the strength and determination in her eyes, and it made him feel safe, protected, and, most importantly, valued. The crowd of parents around them remained quiet, their expressions ranging from curiosity to approval. Jamal noticed a few nodding in agreement with his mother's words. Even some of the children, who had stopped their games to watch the confrontation, seemed to understand that something important was happening. Aisha bent down again, meeting her son's gaze. "Do you see what I mean, baby?" she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "You have every right to be here. No one can take that away from you." Jamal nodded, his small hand squeezing hers. "I understand, Mommy," he whispered. Aisha turned her attention back to the woman, her voice calm but unyielding. "Let me make something very clear," she said, her tone measured and deliberate. "Your actions today were unacceptable. You made a child feel unwelcome and hurt him, all because of your prejudice." The woman avoided Aisha's gaze, her discomfort clear. "I already said I'm sorry," she muttered, glancing toward the parking lot as if she couldn't wait to leave. "An apology is a start," Aisha replied firmly, "but it doesn't erase what happened. You need to think about the example you're setting for your children. They're watching and learning from everything you do." At this, the woman's children, standing awkwardly behind her, looked up at their mother. Their expressions were a mix of confusion and guilt, as though they were beginning to question her actions. The weight of their stares seemed to sink in, and the woman's shoulders slumped slightly. From the gathered crowd, a father stepped forward, his hands tucked into his pockets. "She's right," he said, addressing the woman. "What you did was wrong. Every child here deserves to play without feeling judged." Another parent, a mother with 2 young children by her side, nodded. "This is a playground, not a place for exclusion," she added. "We're all part of the same community, and we need to do better for our kids." Hearing these words, Jamal glanced around at the other parents, their supportive expressions filling him with a new sense of belonging. For the first time since the incident, he felt like the park was his again, a place where he could run, laugh, and play without fear. Aisha straightened her back, addressing the crowd with calm authority. "This isn't just about my son," she said. "It's about all of our children. They deserve to grow up in a world where they're treated with respect and kindness, no matter who they are or where they come from." Her words hung in the air, resonating with everyone present. Parents exchanged thoughtful glances, and some even murmured words of agreement. The children, though too young to fully grasp the weight of the moment, watched quietly, sensing that something significant was taking place. Jamal stood beside his mother, his small hands still in hers. He looked up at her with admiration, feeling a sense of pride that she was his mom. After a moment of silence, Aisha turned back to Jamal and smiled warmly. "Now," she said, crouching down to his level, "why don't you go back and play? You have every right to enjoy this playground just like everyone else." Jamal hesitated for a second, glancing back toward the jungle gym where the other kids were gathered. But then he nodded, a smile creeping across his face. "Okay, Mommy," he said, his voice stronger now. As he let go of her hand and ran back toward the jungle gym, Aisha watched him with a mixture of pride and relief. She noticed that the other children quickly welcomed him back into their game, their laughter resuming as though nothing had happened. The white woman, still standing awkwardly near the parking lot, looked around at the crowd before mumbling, "Let's go," to her children. They followed her silently, casting uncertain glances back at the playground as they walked away. It was clear that this moment would leave an impression, not just on her, but on everyone who had witnessed it. As Jamal ran and laughed with the other children, Aisha felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Her son's resilience, paired with the support of the community, had turned what could have been a deeply scarring experience into a moment of empowerment. She took a seat back on the bench, her book forgotten for now. Instead, she watched Jamal play, his laughter filling the air once again. He climbed the jungle gym with confidence, tagging another child and yelling, "You're it!" His joy was infectious, and Aisha felt a wave of pride knowing that he had reclaimed his happiness. For Aisha, the confrontation wasn't just about standing up for her son, it was about teaching him an important lesson, that he was amiable, deserving, and capable of overcoming adversity. And as she watched him run and play, she knew he had learned that lesson well. As Jamal ran off to rejoin the other children, the air around the playground seemed to shift. The tension that had gripped the parents and children began to dissipate, replaced by an unspoken understanding that something meaningful had just happened. Jamal's laughter once again echoed through the playground, blending with the sounds of other children at play. Aisha stood watching him for a moment, her arms crossed and her heart swelling with pride. She had defended her son, but more than that, she had made a statement, one that resonated with the community around her. She turned back to face the gathered parents, her voice calm but resolute. "This is about more than just today," she began, addressing the group. "It's about the kind of world we're creating for our children. They're watching us, learning from our actions. If we don't teach them respect and kindness now, what kind of future are we building for them?" Several parents nodded in agreement, murmurs of, "She's right," rippling through the crowd. Aisha's words struck a chord, leaving an impact that lingered in the expressions of those who had gathered. One mother stepped forward, holding her young daughter's hand. "Thank you for standing up for your son," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've seen too many moments like this go unchecked. You're teaching all of us a lesson today." Another father chimed in, "I bring my kids here every week and I want them to grow up in a place where everyone feels welcome. What happened today shouldn't happen again. Not here, not anywhere." Aisha acknowledged their support with a grateful nod. While their words couldn't erase what had happened to Jamal, they gave her hope that this moment could spark change, not just for her son, but for all the children in the community. Meanwhile, the woman who had confronted Jamal stood near the parking lot, her children by her side. Her earlier defiance had melted away, replaced by a mix of discomfort and quiet reflection. The stares from the other parents weighed heavily on her, and she shifted uneasily. Without another word, she motioned for her children to follow her. "Let's go," she muttered, her voice low and subdued. They walked toward their car, the children casting curious glances back at the playground. It was clear that the day's events would leave a mark, not just on Jamal, but on her family as well. As Aisha watched Jamal playing with the other children, a wave of relief washed over her. He climbed the jungle gym with confidence, his laughter loud and carefree. She noticed that the other kids treated him no differently than before, their game resuming as though the earlier confrontation had never happened. For Jamal, the incident had been painful, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had taught him an important lesson about resilience and self-worth. He knew his mother would always stand by him, and that knowledge gave him the courage to face the world. Aisha stood watching him for a moment, her arms crossed and her heart swelling with pride. She had defended her son, but more than that, she had made a statement, one that resonated with the community around her. She turned back to face the gathered parents, her voice calm but resolute. "This is about more than just today," she began, addressing the group. "It's about the kind of world we're creating for our children. They're watching us, learning from our actions. If we don't teach them respect and kindness now, what kind of future are we building for them?" Several parents nodded in agreement, murmurs of, "She's right," rippling through the crowd. Aisha's words struck a chord, leaving an impact that lingered in the expressions of those who had gathered. One mother stepped forward, holding her young daughter's hand. "Thank you for standing up for your son," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've seen too many moments like this go unchecked. You're teaching all of us a lesson today." Another father chimed in, "I bring my kids here every week, and I want them to grow up in a place where everyone feels welcome. What happened today shouldn't happen again. Not here, not anywhere." Aisha acknowledged their support with a grateful nod. While their words couldn't erase what had happened to Jamal, they gave her hope that this moment could spark change, not just for her son, but for all the children in the community. Meanwhile, the woman who had confronted Jamal stood near the parking lot, her children by her side. Her earlier defiance had melted away, replaced by a mix of discomfort and quiet reflection. The stares from the other parents weighed heavily on her, and she shifted uneasily. Without another word, she motioned for her children to follow her. "Let's go," she muttered, her voice low and subdued. They walked toward their car, the children casting curious glances back at the playground. It was clear that the day's events would leave a mark, not just on Jamal, but on her family as well. As Aisha watched Jamal playing with the other children, a wave of relief washed over her. He climbed the jungle gym with confidence, his laughter loud and carefree. She noticed that the other kids treated him no differently than before, their game resuming as though the earlier confrontation had never happened. For Jamal, the incident had been painful, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had taught him an important lesson about resilience and self-worth. He knew his mother would always stand by him, and that knowledge gave him the courage to face the world. Aisha returned to her bench, her focus still on Jamal. Nearby, two other parents approached, clearly moved by what had transpired. One of them, Mom, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, said, "You handled that beautifully. It's not always easy to address something like this head-on, but you did it with such grace." Aisha smiled softly. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, "but I couldn't let her actions go unchallenged. My son needed to see that he matters, that he belongs." The woman nodded, glancing toward her own children. "You're absolutely right. It's a reminder for all of us to do better, to be better, for our kids." In the days that followed, news of the incident spread through the neighborhood. Many parents who hadn't been at the park that day heard about what had happened, and it sparked conversations about inclusion, fairness, and the example adults set for children. Some parents made a point of reaching out to Aisha, expressing their support and admiration. "You've made us think about things we take for granted," one mother said during a school drop-off. "We all need to be more aware of how we treat each other." Aisha used these moments to share her perspective, always bringing the focus back to the children. "They're the ones who carry our lessons into the future," she often said. "We need to make sure those lessons are worth carrying." The playground slowly became a more welcoming place. Parents began to take a more active role in fostering a sense of inclusion, encouraging their children to play with everyone, regardless of differences. The change wasn't instant, but it was noticeable, a subtle yet meaningful shift in how people interacted. Jamal continued to visit the playground, his confidence restored. He no longer hesitated to approach new friends or join in games. Each time he played, he carried with him the knowledge that he belonged, no matter what. One evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, Aisha sat with Jamal on their porch. He was tired but happy after a long day of playing at the park. "Mommy," he said, looking up at her, "do you think that lady will ever be nice to kids like me?" Aisha paused, considering his question carefully. "I hope so, baby," she said softly. "Sometimes people need to be shown a better way. What happened at the park wasn't just for you, it was for her too. Maybe it'll help her see things differently." Jamal nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I think she'll remember," he said with the wisdom of a child. Aisha smiled, pulling him close. "I think she will too. And she said. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Aisha felt a sense of peace. The day at the playground had been hard, but it had also been a turning point, not just for Jamal, but for everyone who had witnessed it. And as she held her son close, she knew they had taken a step toward a better future together.